Good morning, everybody. How are you all doing? It's good to be here. My name is Graham. I took up membership here, and then swiftly went off to pastor a church 7 blocks down the road. That was like within a few months of taking up membership. So, am I still on the membership roll here? No, I think they cut me pretty quick. So I'm glad that you guys still invited me back. I love you guys. I love being here. But yeah, this congregation looks a lot different than when I was here last. I guess I've been pastoring at a church called Peace Church on 52nd. 7 blocks down the road, just off Fraser, for a year and a half or so now, maybe a little bit more than that at this point. That's been going very, very well, but it's a gift to come back here. This is a place I consider my home church, so very, very glad to be here. Glad to give Josh a break, even though I'm on my own vacation and chose to. This, like a few weeks ago, I realized, why did I choose to still work on vacation? But here we are. I'm going to bring you a passage and a sermon it's a kind of a weird passage, I should also mention, I've been able to maintain connection with this church especially through Jess. Okay, Jessica Chan is our church's favorite preacher. Usually I contemplate quitting after she preaches because she does a very good job every time she comes over, and we're always really blessed to have her. So whatever small connections we can have in the South Vancouver neighborhood is something that I'm always very glad to foster and be involved with. And I appreciate just the opportunities to stay connected here. So this passage, it's a weird one, and this is a message I brought to another church that was doing a series called Weird Stories of the Bible, okay? And I've got a favorite story in the Bible, and that one is a very, very strange one, and so it's truly like one where you read it and you go what eternal truths can I do that would be good for my soul, that can I draw out of that? And I hope that we've found something here, and I think that the Spirit has spoken to me through it, through some digging and engaging with the text. But let me read for you our passage, and we will get into it. So this is Judges chapter 3, verses 12 through 30. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. And again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." And the king said to his attendants, "Leave us," and they all left. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind and locked them. And after he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked, and they said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace." They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, this is the bathroom that they're talking about, everybody, okay? When they did not open the doors of the room, they took the key and unlocked them, and they saw their lord fall into the floor dead. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Seirah. When he escaped there, he blew a trumpet in the hill city of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. "Follow me," he ordered, "for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." So they followed him down and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed nobody to cross over it. And at that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Nobody escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. This is the word of the Lord. All right. So just to condense this down for you, so you know that you're not daydreaming, okay? This is a story about a guy who is left-handed, who snuck a knife into the king's quarters in order to kill the king, and then he stabs the king, but the king is so fat that the knife stays in the king's body, then the king dies, and then the king poops, and then the guy who stabbed the king escapes through the toilet. That's the story. It's weird, okay? What do we do with that? Like, there has to be a reason that this was placed in Scripture. Every story in the Bible exists to point us towards God and teach us about him or reveal something to us about our human nature, right? So let's try. Let's try to pull something from this. And I think we're going to find something that God is saying to us, teaching us about him and teaching us about our nature. And I hope that we can all be drawn closer to God through this. So, to begin, we have to notice where this story lands in the timeline of Scripture, okay? This is a story in the book of Judges. And in the book of Judges, there are 12 people called judges. And Ehud is the second judge, okay? And the task of the judges is to lead and to guide Israel in a time when Israel had no king. And that's the way God wanted it. God did not want Israel to have a king. God was supposed to be their king. And so they needed no human ruler. You know, human rulers are the source of war and corruption and conflict. Human rulers mess up and perform all kinds of evil. And God wants to protect his people from the plight that human rulers give. But God's people are caught up in a cycle, okay? It's a cycle brought on by all the kinds of evil that they get involved in. And this cycle is what guides judges. It's a pattern, and it runs like clockwork. And here's how the cycle goes. It goes, Israel does evil, and they worship foreign gods. Israel falls into oppression by foreign rulers because they failed to keep God's law. Then Israel cries out for help because they're fallen into oppression. And then God sends a judge who delivers Israel from the enemy and brings them back to worshiping him. And then Israel enters a time of peace. And then Israel falls away and starts worshiping other gods, and the cycle starts up over and over again. So in short, the cycle goes sin, oppression, deliverance, peace. Sin, oppression, deliverance, peace. Sin, oppression, deliverance, peace. And that cycle is so predictable. It happens 12 times in the book of Judges. And so this gives us some insight into what this story is about, you know. And this book is not just about the history of God's people, but it's a warning about the patterns and predicaments that God's people get themselves in. You know, it's a reminder that says, when left to our own devices, we choose harm. And it highlights for us that the cycles we see in the Judges is one that we are still caught up in today. And so it's important to acknowledge that the stories in Judges are not nice, right? They're not something that you go to find like spiritual enlightenment for the most part. These stories are disturbing, and these stories are violent, and we are not supposed to like them. That they exist to remind us of all the evil that humans are capable of, and all the ways that human rulers will fail us and lead us to desire. This leads us to desire a better ruler, a better king, a good king, a king that can only come from God himself. And so that's the book of Judges. That's where the story is contained. But let's get into the story of Ehud, the left-handed stabber, okay? So we meet our friend Ehud, and he has come to free Israel from their oppression under the Moabites. And there's a lot of significant intricacies in this story that I just want to highlight for us here. Because it's not just a funny swerve that comes out of left field, okay? First off, Ehud is left-handed. That's mentioned a couple times in the story, so that must be important. So why is that important, everybody? Everybody know? Everybody know? Okay, I'll remind you. First off, he is from the tribe of Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. Okay? Benjamin is the son of my right hand, but Ehud, the Benjaminite, is left-handed. So that sets us up to expect something to happen in the story. Okay? So we creep forward in our seats when we read this. And then second, the dagger on the right thigh, this is to sneak it into the king's quarters. That's not where you would usually put daggers if you were left-handed. No, you reach down and you grab it with your left hand, and if you're right-handed, you put it on your left thigh. There we go. So that's sneaking a knife into the king's quarters, and again, we creep a little further forward in our seats. I can see everybody is approaching the edge. Third, left-handed fighters had advantage in war because most others were right-handed, and they expect the angles of a sword they expect right-handed angles, right? This guy's left-handed. What are they going to do when a sword comes from their left? And so now we are planted firmly at the edge of our seat. But wait, there's more, okay? Because the king of Moab, his name is Eglon. That means young bull, okay? What do you usually call a young cow, a young bull? That's a calf, right? Okay, so the king of Moab, his name is Eglon. He is a calf. He is described as very fat. He is a fatted calf. What does that make you think of, right? This is a calf ready for sacrifice, okay? So in this ridiculous story, it's so intricate and thought out that it's not just a story about the left-handed stabber, but this is a poetic story about the fatted calf being sacrificed for the deliverance of God's people, okay? And this points us forwards to Jesus. Weird, okay? And then Eglon poops and Ehud escapes through the toilet. I don't know what to do with that part. If you guys have any insight into that, let me know, okay? But after Ehud escapes, he has the time to gather the armies of Israel to bring final victory over the Moabites before the king's guards even know that Eglon has died. And they took possession of the fords of the Jordan, and they allowed nobody to cross, and they killed 10,000 Moabites that day. And then there was peace in Israel. Okay? This is an action movie. This is an epic highlighting the victory of Israel. And you'll notice the next verse 29, it says the land had peace for 80 years. Okay, that was successful, right? That's a victory, right? But this is a cycle. And this is just number 2 in the cycle. And 80 years is nice, but we're early in the Judges. And we might pump our fists and we might cheer when Ehud delivers Israel, but as time ticks on, Israel falls into sin again. They get taken over by their enemies. And eventually we just roll our eyes and go, oh, this is happening again. And I think this is the core of the Judges cycle. You know, the people find peace, but this peace isn't going to last. They find rest, but rest will be shaken soon. And whether the enemy nations, whether they find, whether their peace is shaken through enemy nations or through turning away from God, and we read through the book of Judges, we find that this cycle is exhausting. Okay, because this is just going to happen over and over and over again. And this story that we read today leads us, we see the cycle as absurd, and I think that's where the poop joke and the escaping through the toilet comes in is it's supposed to highlight for us, like, this is ridiculous. Like, if we're going to start the cycle off, number 2 here is going to be so absurd and ridiculous. It sets us up to go, oh my gosh, this again, is this story really what's going to be what defines us as a people? Is seeing the plight of human rulers and what they bring, this again. And the best that Ehud, a judge of Israel, could do is bring peace for 80 years, and then violence starts up again. This is exhausting. And this gives us a desire for a king. Right? This gives us a desire for a better king. And tell me his name. Yeah, you all whispered it very quietly. Jesus. It's a king that we find in Jesus. And we know this story. God didn't want his people to have a king. God would be their perfect king, leading them to true freedom and true peace and true deliverance from the greatest enemy. But God's people keep choosing their own kings, so they get human results. But Jesus is a king who doesn't use violence to bring about his kingdom like Ehud did. Jesus is a king that doesn't oppress the marginalized like Eglon, the king of Moab, did. Jesus is a king that seeks the good of all people, calls us to overcome evil with good, to end cycles of oppression rather than retaliate with violence. Jesus is God who came as a human, familiar with our griefs and sufferings, and he identified with the cast aside, and he sought God's kingdom from the bottom up. Jesus died on the cross, receiving the pain and the sin that keeps us in these cycles of violence. And he became a better sacrifice for the deliverance of his people than the fatted calf ever could be. And he rose to show death doesn't have the final say anymore, and peace can live forever. And Jesus offers the world peace that the world cannot give, and it's going to last longer than 80 years. Right? While the world gives peace through violence and victory, Jesus gives peace by restoring the world to what it was intended to be, where nobody is left behind, where the world can live as family. And this is the king that judges makes us desire, because we just get so tired of seeing the cycles of human violence. And I'm thankful for that. Now, if we come back into the story of Ehud and Eglon, I just want to ask, what do we do with this today? Because there's no two ways about it. This story is a weird story. But I think that's the point. This story is absurd. It highlights how absurd our desires for power can be. It's absurd that we would even celebrate when the left-handed stabber kills the fatted calf on the toilet. There's clear humor that's peppered throughout the story, but I think it's designed to make us look inward and say, I don't like this story. I don't want this to be the story that defines us as a people. And maybe we call for a leader, but unless we're looking to Jesus in obedience and faith, we will never get the leader that we need. The best leaders we can get will only ever offer us a temporary peace, and that peace will always come to an end. When was the last time you feel the world had peace? I don't know. I feel like 2015. Okay, I picture 2015. I don't really remember what. I think Afghanistan was coming to a close. It just felt like things were like kind of okay in 2015, but I'm probably wrong. I'm probably wrong about that one. But today, I don't know if you've been following the news, but to share a little bit about what human leadership does, the people in Gaza are starving. Okay? 18,000 children alone in Gaza have died on account of the war and starvation. Funded by our own tax dollars too, you know? Like the war between Russia and Ukraine keeps on going. Whatever your political stripe is, none of this is good, right? Like, it's never good when children are starving. It's never good. There's famine in Sudan. There's civil war in the Congo. On Friday, a shooter opened fire in a U.S. public health building. And on our own doorsteps, through the plight of climate change, we're looking at another fire season in BC where people are needing to evacuate their communities. And this has me feeling exhausted because I look at the cycles of violence and harm. They're just not stopping. I feel exhausted because these cycles of violence have never stopped. We're still stuck, and we can't seem to escape. And peace never seems to come. When it does, it's temporary. Like, we're still stuck in this cycle that we see in the book of Judges, and it makes me wonder, is the cycle that we see in Judges about more than the people of Israel? Is it about more than ancient people of Israel? Is it about more than what's happening then? Is this story about us? Perhaps this is a book that highlights the human condition, how we keep harming others as we seek our own self-preservation, and about how human leaders will always lead us to fail. And just like the book of Judges, which leads us to desire a better king, maybe we should also desire a better king. One who is coming to bring a final end to our own cycles of violence. And so I invite you, as an application, the take-home for today, in a world that needs a better king in light of all these cycles of violence that we keep seeing perpetuate, the simple take-home I give you is feel exhausted. Feel exhausted. Feel the exhaustion of the Judges cycle. I'm giving this to you because it's the easiest thing to do, because we can so often feel at a loss of how to react, how to interact with the news that's coming in. In a world that we feel lost and we feel afraid of what is to come, it is good to feel exhausted. Be exhausted at the stories of bombs dropped in Iran, in Israel, in Gaza, in Ukraine. Be exhausted at the stories of starvation and famine in Sudan and Palestine. Be exhausted and long for this all to end. And I want you to feel this, because this exhaustion just doesn't end there. Exhaustion leads us to prayer. Exhaustion leads us to action, and exhaustion leads us to hope. Okay, when we feel at a loss, when we feel powerless, our exhaustion leads us to prayer, asking God to bring change, to make a difference. God who is so powerful that when we have nothing we can do, God is able to intervene. We're led to a God through our exhaustion who I have to trust can make some kind of difference. And when we feel this exhaustion, just tired of seeing what is going on, and we see the cycles of violence perpetuate over and over again, we are led to prayer and we are led to action. Okay? To not be overcome with evil, but to overcome evil with good. Make change where you know you can instigate good, even if it's small, because small bits of good in your own life and community will do so much more for the world than bombs dropped anywhere. A couple months ago, our church held a community barbecue, and when I was handing out the dessert, there was one guy. He said, "Thank you so much for doing this. I've only eaten ramen for 3 days." And you know what? That's a small good. That's small. But in a city that struggles with food insecurity, that's meaningful. And one meal did miles more good than any war anywhere could have done. Don't minimize small acts of good that you're able to do. Have your exhaustion lead you to action. And finally, prayer, action, and have your exhaustion lead you to hope. Because just like the cycle in the book of Judges leads us to look for and desire a better king, we have to have that desire too. And just as we see our God come as a human to be our good king in Jesus, we have to have this hope that Jesus is coming again. We have to have this hope that Jesus is coming again to bring his kingdom in its fullness. In a world where these cycles of violence and harm are broken, where the marginalized are no longer forgotten, where the peace will last longer than 80 years. Again, this is a weird story, but the takeaway is this: feel exhausted. And let that exhaustion lead you to prayer. Let that exhaustion lead you to action. And let that exhaustion lead you to hope in the coming of a better king that can provide real and lasting peace.